The conference room fell silent as Adam Blackwell's voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. "My future wife works here." Madeline's breath caught in her throat, her fingers frozen over her laptop keyboard. Around her, 100 heads turned, eyes hungry for scandal, tongues ready to feast on speculation. She should look away. She should disappear into the crowd like she always did, invisible, unremarkable, safe. But then his gaze found hers across the sea of faces, those storm-grey eyes holding secrets that could destroy her. And in that single, suspended moment, Madeline realized that everything she thought she knew about her life, about him, about the careful walls she'd built around her heart, all of it was about to shatter like crystal against marble. The morning started like every other morning in Madeline Carter's carefully constructed life. She woke at 5:45 in her modest apartment in Brooklyn, the early light filtering through sheer curtains that had seen better years. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar song as she stood before her closet, selecting her armor for the day. A navy blazer that had been tailored to hide how well it fit, a cream silk blouse that whispered elegance without shouting it, and trousers that were professional enough to blend into any crowd. Understated, professional, invisible. That was the goal, after all. Invisibility had kept her safe for 3 years at Blackwell Industries. By 7:30, she was on the subway, her face buried in a book she wasn't really reading, her mind already running through the day's tasks. Budget reports, quarterly analyses, the endless stream of emails that would flood her inbox the moment she sat down at her desk on the 42nd floor. She was good at her job, excellent even. Her analyses had saved the company millions, though few people knew it was her work. She preferred it that way. Recognition brought attention, and attention brought questions she wasn't ready to answer. The Blackwell Tower rose like a cathedral of glass and steel against the Manhattan skyline, its reflective surface catching the morning sun and throwing it back at the city in brilliant, almost painful shards of light. Madeleine had walked through its revolving doors 1,000 times, but today something felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that hummed through the marble lobby like a current waiting to spark. "Did you hear?" Jessica from accounting grabbed her arm as they waited for the elevator, her voice pitched to that particular frequency of excitement that preceded gossip. "Emergency all-staff meeting, 10th floor conference room, 9 o'clock sharp." Madeline's stomach tightened. Emergency meetings never meant anything good. "Any idea what it's about?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Jessica leaned closer, her perfume, something expensive and overpowering, making Madeline's eyes water. "Someone said it's about the merger. Others are saying Blackwell's stepping down. Can you imagine? Adam Blackwell just leaving." Madeline could not, in fact, imagine it. Adam Blackwell was Blackwell Industries. He'd built the company from his father's modest real estate firm into a global empire worth billions. He was 38 years old, brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and so intensely private that even the tabloids had given up trying to penetrate his fortress of silence. In 3 years, Madeline had seen him exactly 17 times. She'd counted, though she'd never admitted why, and each time he'd looked through her as if she were made of the same glass as his tower's windows. Which was fine. Perfect, actually. The last thing she needed was to be noticed by Adam Blackwell. The conference room on the 10th floor could hold 200 people comfortably. By 8:55, there were at least 300 crammed inside, with more spilling into the hallway. Madeline found a spot near the back, tucked against a wall beside a potted palm that had seen better days. From here, she could see everything while remaining largely unseen, her preferred vantage point in life. The room hummed with speculation. Voices rose and fell like waves against a shore, each person adding their theory to the collective anxiety that permeated the space. Madeleine opened her laptop, trying to focus on the spreadsheet that had been her project for the past week, but her fingers kept slipping on the keys. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doors at the front of the room opened. Adam Blackwell entered like winter itself, sharp, clean, and impossible to ignore. He wore a charcoal suit that had been cut by hands that understood fabric as an art form, a white shirt that made his tan skin seem even more golden, and no tie. He never wore ties. It was one of those small rebellions that reminded people he answered to no one. The room fell silent so quickly that Madeleine could hear her own heartbeat. Adam moved to the podium with the grace of a man who had never questioned his right to command a space. His dark hair was slightly longer than corporate convention dictated, touching his collar in a way that suggested he had more important things to think about than haircuts. His face was all sharp angles and strong lines, a face that belonged on ancient coins or modern billboards. But it was his eyes that held people captive, grey as storm clouds, intelligent as a chess master, and currently sweeping across the crowd with an intensity that made Madeleine want to shrink further behind her palm tree. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room without the need for a microphone. It was a voice made for persuasion, for closing deals, for making people believe in impossible things. "I'll keep this brief. I know you all have work to do." He paused, and in that pause, Madeleine felt the entire room hold its breath. As many of you know, Blackwell Industries is in the final stages of a significant acquisition, Hartwell International. It's a deal that will double our global footprint and position us as the preeminent force in international development for the next decade. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't news. The Hartwell deal had been rumored for months. "What you don't know," Adam continued, his hands gripping the edges of the podium with a tension that belied his calm exterior, "is that James Hartwell has one condition for finalizing this merger, a condition that is unconventional." The murmurs grew louder. Madeleine's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "Hartwell is old school, traditional. He believes that a man without a family lacks the stability necessary to run a global enterprise." Adam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He's made it clear that he will only sign over his company to someone who understands the value of commitment, of building something that lasts beyond quarterly earnings reports. Understanding began to dawn across faces in the crowd. Madeleine felt her chest constrict. "So," Adam said, his voice cutting through the rising speculation like a knife through silk, "I'm here to inform you that I'm engaged to be married." The room exploded. Voices erupted from every corner. Shock, excitement, disbelief. Who was she? When did this happen? Why had no one known? Adam raised one hand, and somehow, impossibly, the room quieted again. "My future wife works here," he said, and this time there was something different in his voice, something that sounded almost like vulnerability, though Madeleine knew that couldn't be right. Adam Blackwell didn't do vulnerable. At this company, in this building, if the room had exploded before, now it detonated. People were standing, craning their necks, trying to figure out who among them had managed to capture the attention of the most eligible bachelor in New York. Madeleine watched the chaos unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a movie rather than participating in reality. "I'm not going to announce her name today," Adam continued, having to raise his voice now over the din. "Out of respect for her privacy, and because the details of our arrangement, our engagement, are still being finalized. But I wanted you to hear it from me first, before the press gets wind of it, before the speculation becomes unbearable." His eyes swept across the room again, and this time they seemed to linger on certain faces. Sarah from legal, who had been openly pursuing him for years. Catherine from marketing, who had the pedigree and connections that made her an obvious choice. Elena from international relations, who was beautiful, brilliant, and spoke 6 languages fluently. Madeleine felt a strange hollowness in her chest. Of course it would be one of them, someone appropriate, someone who belonged in Adam Blackwell's world of penthouse apartments and private jets and galas where tickets cost more than her monthly rent. She started to close her laptop, ready to slip out in the chaos, when Adam's next words stopped her cold. "She's exceptional," he said, and now his voice had dropped to something quieter, something that forced people to lean in to hear. Brilliant in ways that have nothing to do with pedigree or connections. She sees patterns others miss. She understands that real value isn't always visible on a balance sheet, and she has no idea how extraordinary she is, which might be the most extraordinary thing about her. Madeleine's hands trembled on her keyboard. Something in his tone, in the way he spoke those words, made her skin prickle with an awareness she didn't want to name. "That's all I wanted to say," Adam concluded. "Now back to work. We have a merger to close and a future to build." He stepped away from the podium, and the room erupted once more into chaos. But as people began to file out, their voices high with speculation and theory, Adam remained at the front of the room, speaking quietly with his chief of staff, Marcus Chen. And then, just as Madeleine was about to disappear into the crowd, Adam looked up. His eyes found hers across the sea of faces. For 3 heartbeats, she counted them, felt each one hammer against her ribs. He held her gaze. His expression was unreadable, a mask of professional calm, but his eyes held something that made her blood run cold and hot simultaneously, something that looked dangerously like recognition. Then he looked away, and the moment shattered. Madeleine grabbed her laptop and fled. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers and speculation. The entire building vibrated with gossip. Every woman who had ever exchanged more than 2 words with Adam Blackwell was suddenly under scrutiny. Email chains sprouted like weeds, filled with theories and betting pools and elaborate analyses of every interaction anyone had ever witnessed between the CEO and any female employee. Madeleine kept her head down and her office door closed. She worked through lunch, declined 3 invitations to join speculation sessions disguised as coffee breaks, and tried very hard not to think about the way Adam's eyes had found hers in that crowded room. It meant nothing. It was coincidence. He had been looking at the back of the room, scanning the crowd, and his gaze had simply passed over her like it passed over everyone else. She was invisible, remember. That was the whole point. That was survival. By 5:30, Madeleine's eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, and her head throbbed with the effort of not thinking about things she had no business thinking about. She packed up her laptop, pulled on her coat, and headed for the elevator. The car was empty when she stepped inside, which felt like a small mercy. She pressed the button for the lobby and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes as the elevator began its descent. It stopped on the 38th floor. Madeleine opened her eyes as the doors slid open and her heart stopped beating entirely. Adam Blackwell stepped into the elevator. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her. He was looking at his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. The doors began to close. He pressed the button for the lobby without looking up, and then, as the elevator began to move, he lifted his eyes and saw her. Madeleine watched his expression shift through a dozen micro-emotions in the span of a breath. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been calculation. And then, nothing. The mask slid back into place, smooth as glass. "Miss Carter," he said, and the fact that he knew her name made her pulse spike dangerously. "Mr. Blackwell," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Silence filled the elevator like water filling a locked room. 40 floors, 39, 38. Each floor ticked by with agonizing slowness while Madeline tried to remember how to breathe normally. "Eventful day," Adam said after what felt like an eternity. He'd slipped his phone into his pocket and was now standing with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the descending floor numbers above the door. "Yes, sir." The announcement must have caused quite a stir. "People are curious," Madeline said carefully. "It's natural, curious." Adam's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's a diplomatic way to put it. 27 floors. 26. "Mr. Blackwell," Madeline heard herself say, "may I ask you something?" He turned to look at her fully for the first time, and the intensity of his gaze made her wish she'd kept her mouth shut. Of course. Why tell everyone she works here? Wouldn't that just complicate things? For a long moment, Adam didn't answer. The elevator continued its descent, and Madeline wondered if he was going to ignore the question entirely. But then he spoke, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. "Because," he said, "secrets have a way of destroying what they're meant to protect. And because the woman I'm going to marry deserves better than to be treated like a scandal waiting to happen." Something in the way he said it made Madeline's throat tight. 15 floors, 14, 13. "She's very lucky," Madeline said softly, and she meant it, even as something in her chest ached with a loss she had no right to feel. Adam turned to her again, and this time his expression was strange, searching. "Madeline," he said, and the sound of her first name in his voice made her skin feel too tight. "What if I told you?" The elevator chimed. Lobby level. The doors slid open onto the bustling marble expanse of the building's entrance. Adam's jaw tightened. He gestured for her to exit first. "After you." Madeline stepped out into the lobby, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. She turned back to say something. "Thank you. Good night." Anything to fill the sudden yawning silence. But Adam was already walking away, his phone back at his ear, his attention claimed by whatever crisis required his immediate attention. She watched him disappear through the revolving doors and into a waiting black car that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. Just another executive. Just another day. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed. And Madeline knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent years building walls around her heart, that her careful, invisible life was about to be demolished. She just didn't know yet that the demolition had already begun. The email arrived at 7:43 the next morning. Madeline was still in her apartment, nursing her second cup of coffee and trying to convince herself that yesterday had been a fever dream, when her phone chimed with the particular tone that indicated a message from someone in senior leadership. She almost ignored it. Senior leadership never emailed her directly, but something made her pick up the phone. "From Adam Blackwell to Madeline Carter. Subject: meeting required time. Sent 7:43. Miss Carter, please come to my office today at noon. Lunch will be provided. This is not optional." A.B. Madeline read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Adam Blackwell didn't email mid-level analysts. He had assistants for that. He had entire departments designed to insulate him from the daily minutiae of employee interactions. Her hands shook as she set down the coffee cup. This was about yesterday, about the elevator, about whatever question he'd been about to ask before the doors opened and reality rushed back in. She should ignore it. She should claim illness, urgent family business, anything that would let her avoid walking into whatever trap was waiting in his office. But the email had said, "not optional," and Madeline had learned long ago that some invitations were really commands dressed in polite language. She arrived at Blackwell Tower at 8:30, 2 hours earlier than usual, hoping to lose herself in work before the appointed meeting. But focus was impossible. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like a year. By 11:45, she'd rewritten the same email 7 times and analyzed a budget report so many times the numbers had lost all meaning. At 11:55, she stood before the elevator that would take her to the 62nd floor, Adam's floor, a place she'd never been invited before, the executive level, where decisions worth billions were made over coffee that probably cost more per cup than her daily subway fare. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area that looked like it had been decorated by someone who understood that true luxury whispers rather than shouts. Cream leather, dark wood. Original artwork that Madeline recognized from a museum exhibition she'd attended last year. Floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into a living painting. Miss Carter, a woman in her mid-50s with silver hair and an expression that gave away nothing, stood behind a glass desk. "Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. Through those doors, first office on your right." Madeline's heels clicked against marble that looked like flowing water frozen in stone. She reached the door, solid wood, no nameplate needed because everyone knew whose office this was, and raised her hand to knock. "Come in, Madeline," Adam's voice called before her knuckles could touch wood. She entered a space that somehow managed to be both vast and intimate. The office occupied the entire corner of the building, with windows on 2 sides that showcased Manhattan like a kingdom laid out for inspection. But Adam's desk was human-sized. The chairs looked comfortable rather than intimidating, and there was a small round table near one window where lunch had been set out with the kind of casual elegance that only comes from having enough money to make luxury look effortless. Adam stood at the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets. He wore a navy suit today, the jacket discarded over his chair, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in a way that made him look less like a CEO and more like a man preparing for honest work. "Close the door, please," he said without turning around. Madeleine did as instructed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird against glass. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. "No, sir." "Stop calling me sir. It makes me feel like I'm 80. He turned then, and the full force of his attention hit her like a physical thing. "Adam is fine. We're about to have a conversation that requires a certain degree of informality." Madeline's mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "Sit down." He gestured to the table where lunch waited, salads that looked like edible art, sandwiches cut into precise triangles, fruit that glistened like jewels. "You should eat something. This is going to take a while." She sat because her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. Adam took the chair across from her, not beside her, maintaining a distance that felt both professional and deeply personal. "Yesterday," he began, "I announced my engagement to someone who works here." "I remember." "What you don't know, what no one knows except 3 people in this world, is that the engagement is a business arrangement, a contract." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his grey eyes never leaving her face. "James Hartwell won't sign over his company to an unmarried man. He believes marriage proves stability, commitment, the ability to build something lasting. It's archaic and ridiculous, but it's also non-negotiable. I've spent 6 months trying to find another way. There isn't one." Madeline's brain struggled to process what he was saying. "So you're going to marry someone for business?" "I was planning to, yes. I had a list of potential candidates. Women from appropriate families with the right connections who would understand that this was a mutually beneficial transaction with an end date built in. 2 years. Long enough to close the Hartwell deal and establish stability. Short enough to avoid actual entanglement. That sounds, Madeline searched for a word that wouldn't offend, complicated. It sounds sterile, Adam said flatly. Which was the point. No emotions, no complications, no risk. He picked up a glass of water but didn't drink from it. And then 3 weeks ago, I was reviewing departmental performance reports, and I came across your name. Madeline's breath caught. My name. Your analysis of the Singapore development project. Do you remember it? She nodded slowly. 6 months ago, she'd been asked to review the financials on a proposed luxury resort development. The numbers had looked good on the surface, but something hadn't added up. She dug deeper, run different models, and discovered that the project was built on falsified environmental impact studies and inflated property valuations. Her report had killed a $50 million deal. You saved this company from a disaster that would have cost us far more than money, Adam said. You saw what 6 senior analysts missed. You had the courage to write a report that contradicted what everyone wanted to hear. Do you know how rare that is? I was just doing my job. You were doing everyone else's job better than they do. He finally set down the water glass. So I started paying attention. I pulled your file. I reviewed your work from the past 3 years, and I realized something. The air in the room felt too thin. Madeline gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. You're invisible on purpose, Adam said quietly. You dress to blend in. You avoid company events. You never take credit for your work. You've turned yourself into a ghost in a building full of people desperate to be seen. He tilted his head. The question is, why? Madeline's throat closed. How did he see that? How had he looked at her for what couldn't have been more than a few minutes total and understood something she'd spent 3 years perfecting? That's not really your business, she managed. It wasn't, Adam agreed, until yesterday, when I realized that the woman I need isn't on my carefully curated list. She's sitting in an office on the 42nd floor, analyzing budgets and hiding in plain sight. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything. You can't be serious, Madeline whispered. I'm completely serious. Adam stood and moved to the window, giving her space to breathe, to think. I need a wife for 2 years. Someone intelligent enough to navigate my world, but independent enough not to get lost in it. Someone who won't fall in love with the idea of being Mrs. Adam Blackwell, because you'd have to actually like Adam Blackwell for that to happen, and we barely know each other. This is insane. This is business. He turned back to face her. I'm offering you a contract, Madeline. 2 years. You'll live in my penthouse. Separate bedrooms, obviously. You'll attend events as my wife. You'll learn to move through my world with the same intelligence you bring to your spreadsheets. And in return, I'll pay you $5 million. The number hit her like a slap. $5 million. She could pay off her student loans, which still hung around her neck like a noose. She could send money to her mother, who was working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and refusing to accept help. She could finally stop running from a past that chased her through nightmares. And after 2 years? Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Quiet divorce. Generous settlement that will be in addition to the $5 million. You can disappear back into your invisible life, if that's what you want. Or you can use the experience to launch yourself into something bigger. Your choice. Madeline stood on shaking legs and walked to the window. From 62 floors up, the city looked like a toy, manageable and small. But she knew better. Down there, people were fighting and struggling and trying to survive. Down there, she'd been fighting and struggling and trying to survive for 3 years. Why me? She asked without turning around. Really, there are a dozen women in this building who would be better at playing your wife, women who already know your world, who belong there. That's exactly why not them, Adam said, and suddenly he was behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the subtle scent of his cologne, something with cedar and rain. They would expect things. They would want things, They would see this as an opportunity to turn a contract into something real, and when I couldn't give them that, it would end badly. And you think I won't want anything? I think you're already running from something, he said quietly. I think you've built your whole life around staying hidden, staying safe, staying small. I think whatever you're running from scares you more than I ever could. And I think $5 million might give you the freedom to stop running. Madeline closed her eyes. He was right. God help her, he was right about all of it. I need time to think, she said. You have until 5 o'clock today. After that I move on to option B, and we both pretend this conversation never happened. She turned to face him then, and the intensity in his eyes nearly made her step backward. What if I say yes, and then I'm terrible at it? What if I can't be what you need? For the first time since she'd entered his office, Adam smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her pulse stumble. Madeline, he said, you've spent 3 years convincing an entire company that you're nobody special. If you can do that, you can convince the world that you're in love with me. Trust me. He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick envelope. This is the contract. Take it, read it. Every clause, every condition, every protection is outlined in legal language. You'll see that this isn't a trap. It's just business. Madeline took the envelope with numb fingers. It was heavy, substantial, real. 5 o'clock, Adam repeated. Email me yes or no. Nothing else required. She nodded because words had abandoned her entirely. As she walked to the door, Adam spoke one more time. Madeline, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be spectacular. She fled. Madeline sent the email at 4:57. One word, yes. Adam's response came 30 seconds later. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 6 a.m. Pack for a week. Passport required. She stared at her phone screen until the words blurred, then slowly, mechanically, began to pack a life she was about to leave behind. The black car arrived at precisely 6 o'clock the next morning, idling outside her building like a sleek predator. Madeline climbed in with a single suitcase and a heart that felt like it was trying to escape her chest. The driver, an older man with kind eyes and the discretion of someone who'd seen everything and judged nothing, said only, Good morning, Miss Carter. We're heading to Teterboro. Teterboro. Private airport, of course. The jet was smaller than she'd imagined, but more luxurious than anything she'd ever experienced. Cream leather seats that looked like they'd been carved from clouds, dark wood accents, windows that turned the dawn into a painting. Adam was already aboard, dressed in dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look less like a CEO and more like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine dedicated to men who sailed yachts and broke hearts. Paris, he said by way of greeting. We have 48 hours to transform you from analyst to fiancé. Margot Delacroix is the best in the business. She'll handle everything. Wardrobe, styling, etiquette coaching. By the time we return to New York, you'll be ready for the engagement announcement party. Madeline sank into a seat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. This is really happening. This is really happening. Adam settled into the seat across from her, his long legs stretched out in a way that made the space feel suddenly smaller. But before we take off, we need to establish some ground rules, things the contract doesn't cover, but that we both need to understand. She nodded, grateful for structure, for boundaries, for anything that made this feel less like she was falling through space with no parachute. First, Adam said, holding up one finger, honesty between us. When we're alone, no performance. I need to know when something isn't working, when you're uncomfortable, when this arrangement is costing you more than it should. Can you do that? Yes. Second, your privacy is paramount. I've already had my security team sweep your apartment, upgrade your locks, install a panic button. Anyone who tries to dig into your past will hit a wall built by the best lawyers money can buy. Whatever you're running from stays buried. That's not negotiable. Madeline's throat tightened. Thank you. Third, and here his expression shifted into something harder. In public, we are madly in love. Not friendly, not cordial, in love. That means you'll need to be comfortable with me touching you. Your hand, your waist, your shoulder. Nothing inappropriate but enough to sell the illusion. If that's going to be a problem, we need to address it now. The thought of his hands on her made Madeline's skin feel like it was conducting electricity. It won't be a problem. Good. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, those storm-grey eyes searching her face. Madeline, I know this is overwhelming. I know you're probably terrified, but I need you to trust me. I'm very good at what I do, and what I do is build things that last. For the next 2 years, we're building a marriage that looks real enough to fool everyone who matters, and then we'll dismantle it so carefully that no one gets hurt. Can you trust me to do that? She thought about the contract she'd read 7 times last night, about every protection he'd built into it, about the way he'd seen through her carefully constructed invisibility and still chosen her. I can trust you. Then let's go build something beautiful. Paris in October was a city dressed in gold and rust, the autumn light turning every street into a photograph waiting to be taken. They landed at Le Bourget just after 8 p.m. local time, and Madeleine was so exhausted from the flight and the adrenaline crash that she barely registered the drive into the city, the arrival at a hotel that looked like it had been transplanted from the 18th century, or being shown to a suite that was larger than her entire apartment. She collapsed onto a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, and didn't wake until noon the next day. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she found Adam working at a desk by the window, his laptop open, his phone pressed to his ear as he conducted business in what sounded like fluent French. He looked up when she entered, held up one finger in a wait gesture and concluded his call. Good, you're awake. Margot will be here in an hour. Have some breakfast, there's a spread in the dining room, and then prepare to be transformed. He smiled, and it still did strange things to her equilibrium. Think of it as a particularly intensive makeover montage, except it lasts 2 days and costs what most people make in a year. Margot Delacroix arrived like a force of nature, a woman in her 60s with white hair cut into a sharp bob, black clothing that looked both casual and impossibly chic, and eyes that saw everything. She circled Madeleine 3 times without speaking, then nodded once. Bon, good bones, excellent posture. You hold tension in your shoulders. We will fix that. Your skin is beautiful but neglected. Your hair wants to be magnificent, but you have been hiding it. And these clothes... She waved a dismissive hand at Madeleine's conservative blazer and trousers. These must be burned, immediately. Adam, watching from his position by the window, laughed. I'll leave you to it. I have meetings all afternoon. Margot, she's in your hands. What followed were the most intense 48 hours of Madeleine's life. Margot dragged her to ateliers where women with measuring tapes and pins created clothing that looked like wearable art. To salons where her hair was cut and colored into something that still looked like her, but better, richer, deeper, with subtle highlights that caught the light. To spas where she was scrubbed and polished and massaged until her skin glowed and the permanent tension in her shoulders finally released. But the transformation wasn't just physical. Margot taught her how to move through space like she owned it, how to enter a room with confidence that looked effortless, how to make small talk that sounded genuine even when it was calculated. She learned which fork to use at formal dinners, how to navigate receiving lines at galas, how to deflect intrusive questions with grace. You are not pretending to be someone else, Margot explained, as they walked through the Tuileries garden on their second afternoon, the autumn sun filtering through the trees in shafts of honey-colored light. You are revealing who you already are beneath the armor you have been wearing. Madeline Carter, the analyst, dressed to disappear. Madeline Carter, the woman can afford to be seen. Deal. On their last evening in Paris, Adam took her to dinner at a restaurant that didn't have a sign because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. They sat at a corner table draped in white linen, with candles that made the crystal glasses glow like captured stars, and ate food that was so exquisite Madeline wanted to cry. "You look different," Adam said, studying her across the table. She wore one of the new dresses, midnight blue silk that draped over her body like water, with a neckline that was elegant rather than revealing, and sleeves that ended just above her wrists. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and Margot had taught her how to apply makeup that enhanced rather than masked. "Different good or different bad?" Madeline asked, surprised by how much she cared about his answer. "Different stunning." His voice was quiet, almost reluctant, as if the admission cost him something. "I knew you were beautiful, but I didn't realize you'd been hiding quite how beautiful." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Adam, we need to practice," he said, cutting off whatever she'd been about to say. He reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong against hers. "Being comfortable with this. With touching. With looking at each other like we're not discussing quarterly reports." Madeline's pulse jumped at the contact. His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand, and she wondered if he could feel her heartbeat through her skin. "Tell me something real," Adam said. "Something that's not in any file, that you've never told anyone at Blackwell. Something that helps me understand who you are beneath all that carefully constructed invisibility." She should deflect, should maintain the walls. But his hand was warm on hers, and Paris glowed around them like a promise, and something in her was tired of hiding. "I used to paint," she said quietly. "Before, when I was younger. Watercolors mostly. Landscapes that existed only in my imagination. Places that felt safe." "Why did you stop?" "Because the person I was then, she doesn't exist anymore. She couldn't survive what came after, so I became someone else. Someone practical, someone invisible." Adam's hand tightened on hers. "What came after?" Madeline pulled her hand back gently but firmly. "That's not part of the contract." For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he nodded. "Fair enough. But Madeline, that person you were, the one who painted safe places, she's not gone. She's just been hiding, and maybe for the next 2 years you can let her breathe a little." They returned to New York on a Thursday afternoon. The engagement announcement party was scheduled for Saturday night at Adam's penthouse, an intimate gathering of only 200 of the city's most influential people. Madeline had exactly 48 hours to prepare for her debut as the future Mrs. Blackwell. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city from every angle. It was masculine but not cold, with dark wood floors, cream-colored furniture, and art that looked like it belonged in museums. Adam showed her to her room, a suite with its own bathroom, sitting area, and windows that overlooked the Hudson River. "Your space," he said simply. "I won't enter without permission. The only time we share space is when we're performing for an audience." Madeline stood in the center of a bedroom that was larger and more beautiful than anywhere she'd ever lived, and felt the weight of what she'd agreed to settle over her like a heavy coat. 2 years. She could do this for 2 years. Saturday night arrived with the inevitability of a tidal wave. Madeline stood in front of her mirror, wearing a gown that Margot had insisted was the one. Emerald green silk that made her skin glow, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that moved like liquid when she walked. Her hair was swept up in a style that looked effortless, but had taken 45 minutes to achieve. Diamond earrings, borrowed from Margot, who'd simply said, You'll buy your own soon enough. Caught the light with every movement. She looked like someone else. Someone who belonged in Adam Blackwell's world. A knock on her door. "Madeleine, they're starting to arrive." She opened the door to find Adam in a tuxedo that made her forget how to breathe. He looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking, something flickering in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "Ready?" he finally asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." He offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. They walked together through the penthouse to the main living area, where caterers had transformed his home into something that belonged in a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses, candlelight that made everything glow, music from a string quartet that played in one corner, and people, so many people, faces she recognized from business news and society pages, voices that carried the confidence of those who'd never questioned their right to exist in spaces like this. Adam's hand found the small of her back, warm through the thin silk of her dress. He leaned close, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Remember, we're madly in love. Just follow my lead." He guided her into the room, and conversation stuttered to a halt as people turned to look. Madeleine felt their eyes on her like physical touches, assessing, calculating, judging. She wanted to shrink back, to become invisible again, to run. But Adam's hand tightened on her waist, anchoring her, and she remembered Margot's words. "You are not pretending to be someone else. You are revealing who you already are." "Everyone," Adam said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room, "I'd like you to meet the woman who's made me believe in things I thought were impossible. This is Madeleine Carter, my fiancée, and the best decision I've ever made." He turned to look at her as he said it, and the expression on his face was so tender, so genuine, that for a moment Madeleine forgot they were acting. For a moment she believed it herself. The room erupted in applause and congratulations, and then people were surging forward, and Madeleine was shaking hands and accepting cheek kisses and answering questions about how they met with the story they'd rehearsed. A chance encounter in the office, a conversation that turned into coffee, a connection that surprised them both. She played her part perfectly, laughed at the right moments. Let Adam touch her, his hand on her waist, his fingers brushing her arm, his body always near hers in a way that spoke of intimacy and possession. And when he pulled her onto the balcony under the stars and kissed her forehead in full view of 24 guests, she leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later, when the last guest had left and they stood in the sudden silence of the penthouse, surrounded by flowers and the wreckage of the party, Adam loosened his bow tie and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You were perfect," he said quietly. "I knew you would be. But Madeleine, are you okay?" She thought about that question, about the performance she'd just given, about the way his hands had felt on her skin, about how easy it had been to pretend this was real. "I don't know," she admitted. "Ask me again in 2 years." Adam smiled, sad and knowing. "Fair enough. Good night, Madeleine. Thank you for tonight." "Good night, Adam." She walked to her room on shaking legs and closed the door. And only then, in the privacy of her borrowed sanctuary, did she let herself acknowledge the terrifying truth. Somewhere between Paris and tonight, between the contract and the performance, pretending to be in love with Adam Blackwell had started to feel dangerously real. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement party. Madeleine was in the penthouse gym, a space she'd discovered on her second day living there, tucked away on the lower level with windows overlooking the river, when her phone began to vibrate with the kind of persistent urgency that meant something had gone very wrong. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, and counting. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and opened the first message from Jessica at the office. "OMG, are you seeing this? Call me now." The next was from a number she didn't recognize. Gold digger trash. Hope the money was worth it. Her stomach dropped. She opened her news app, and there it was, splashed across every major outlet. Blackwell's bride, rags to riches, or calculated con. The article was vicious. Someone had dug into her past, her childhood in Detroit, her mother's struggles with debt, the scholarships that had been her only path to college, the student loans that had followed her like shadows. They'd found her old apartment, interviewed former neighbors who remembered that quiet girl who never smiled, and somehow obtained photos of her in college, wearing clothes from thrift stores and working double shifts at a campus coffee shop. But the worst part was the narrative they'd woven. Madeline Carter, struggling analyst, had seduced her billionaire boss in a calculated move to escape poverty. The engagement was a farce. She was a con artist, a social climber. A woman who'd used her looks and her proximity to power to trap a man worth billions. The article included side-by-side photos. Madeline before, invisible, plain, unremarkable in her conservative blazers, and Madeline now, at the engagement party, transformed and glowing in emerald silk. Cinderella or opportunist, the caption read. You decide. Madeline's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the phone. This was exactly what she'd feared. Attention, scrutiny. The world's eyes turned toward her like spotlights burning through carefully constructed walls. She was still staring at the screen when the elevator chimed and Adam stepped into the penthouse. He was supposed to be at the office. It was barely 8 in the morning, but he moved through the space with the barely controlled energy of a man holding back fury. "Madeline," he called out, his voice tight. "I'm here." She emerged from the gym, still in her workout clothes, her face bare of makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, vulnerable in a way she hadn't let him see before. Adam stopped when he saw her, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked like concern. "You've seen it. Hard to miss when strangers are texting death threats. Give me your phone." He held out his hand, and when she hesitated, he added quietly, "Please, my security team needs to trace those numbers. And you don't need to read any more of that poison." She handed over the phone, because he was right. Every word was poison, and she could feel it spreading through her veins like venom. Adam made a call, spoke in clipped tones about IP addresses and legal action and protection orders. Then he set both their phones on the counter and turned to her with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have seen this coming. Should have had better protection in place. Should have chosen someone from your world instead of a nobody from Detroit." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with 3 weeks of pretending, of performing, of trying to be someone she wasn't sure she could be. "Don't!" Adam closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Don't you dare let them make you feel less than. Everything in that article is true. You did grow up poor. You did work your way through college. You did build yourself from nothing into someone extraordinary. That's not a scandal. That's a triumph. They're calling me a gold digger, Adam. They're saying I seduced you for money. They're saying exactly what I expected they'd say, which is why I'm going to destroy them." His jaw was tight with controlled rage. "By noon today, we'll have issued a statement. By tonight, our lawyers will have filed defamation suits. By the end of the week, everyone who printed this garbage will remember why it's a bad idea to come after anyone connected to me." Madeline shook her head. "You can't sue everyone, and you can't change what they think. They look at me and see someone who doesn't belong in your world, and maybe they're right." "Stop." Adam's hands came up to her shoulders, firm but gentle, grounding her when she felt like she was spinning apart. "Madeleine, look at me." She did, and the intensity in his storm-grey eyes nearly broke her. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," he said quietly. "Your past doesn't define your worth. Your bank account doesn't determine your value, and anyone who suggests otherwise isn't worth your time or your tears. Do you understand me?" She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But the words in that article had burrowed under her skin, finding every insecurity she'd tried to bury, every fear she'd tried to outrun. "I need some air," she whispered. "I need to think." Adam's hands dropped from her shoulders. "Where are you going? I'll have Marcus drive you." "No, I need to be alone for a few hours. Please." Something flickered across his expression, hurt maybe, or frustration, but he nodded. "Take your new phone, the one my security team set up. And Madeleine, don't believe a word of what they wrote. You're worth 100 of them." She ended up at the Met, wandering through galleries full of paintings that had survived centuries and would outlast all of this manufactured drama. The European galleries were quiet on a Tuesday morning, with only a handful of tourists and art students scattered among the masterpieces. Madeleine stood in front of a Monet, water lilies dissolving into impressionist dreams, and tried to remember who she'd been before all of this. Before Adam, before the contract, before she'd traded invisibility for a spotlight that was currently burning her alive. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" A woman's voice, cultured and calm, came from beside her. "The way he captures light, like he's painting the feeling of a moment rather than the moment itself." Madeleine glanced over to find an elegant black woman in her 60s, dressed in a camel coat and silk scarf, studying the painting with the kind of attention that suggested genuine appreciation rather than casual observation. "It is," Madeleine agreed quietly. The woman smiled. "You're Madeleine Carter, Adam Blackwell's fiancée." Madeleine's entire body tensed, preparing for judgment, for questions, for whatever cruelty this stranger had come to deliver. I'm Diana Hart. I serve on several boards with Adam. I've known him for 15 years. She turned to face Madeleine fully. "I came here because I thought you might need to hear something that the press won't tell you. I'm not sure I can handle any more opinions about my life right now." "Then I'll make it brief." Diana's voice was gentle but firm. "When Adam's father died 8 years ago, everyone expected Adam to fall apart. He was 29 years old, inheriting a company on the verge of collapse, surrounded by vultures waiting to pick the bones clean. Do you know what he did?" Madeleine shook her head. "He rebuilt it, alone, with nothing but intelligence and will and absolute refusal to accept failure. He worked 100-hour weeks. He fired everyone who'd been stealing from his father. He made enemies and strategic alliances and impossible decisions. And when the company finally stabilized, when he could have relaxed, could have enjoyed his success, do you know what he did instead?" "What?" "He built walls," Diana said softly, "around himself. Around his heart. He convinced himself that vulnerability was weakness, that caring was a liability, that the only safe thing in this world was control." She paused, studying Madeleine with eyes that saw too much. "And then he met you." "He didn't meet me," Madeleine said bitterly. "He hired me." "This is a contract, not a fairy tale." "Is it?" Diana's smile was knowing. "Because I was at your engagement party. I watched him watch you. I saw the way he touches you, like he's surprised each time that you're real. I've known Adam Blackwell for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Madeleine's throat tightened. "You're wrong. This is just an arrangement, just business." "Maybe it started that way." Diana reached out and squeezed Madeleine's hand briefly. "But dear girl, I've survived 63 years in a world that loves to tell black women we don't belong in rooms full of power and money. I've weathered scandals and whispers, and 1,000 tiny cuts disguised as compliments, and I learned something important. The people who question your worth are usually terrified of their own inadequacy." She stepped back, adjusting her scarf with practiced elegance. "Don't let them make you small, Madeleine. And don't run from something real just because it started as something practical. Sometimes the best things in life surprise us. Then she walked away, leaving Madeleine alone with Monet and thoughts that felt too big for her chest. She returned to the penthouse just after 3 in the afternoon to find it transformed into a war room. Marcus, Adam's chief of staff, was there with 2 lawyers and Adam's head of security. Papers covered the dining table. Laptops glowed with documents and news feeds, and Adam stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in tones that suggested someone's career was about to end. He turned when she entered, and the relief that flooded his expression made something crack in her chest. "I have to go," he said into the phone, then ended the call without waiting for a response. "Where were you? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I turned off my phone. I needed to think." "You needed to—" He cut himself off, visibly controlling his reaction. To his team, he said, "Give us the room. We'll reconvene in an hour." They filed out quickly, and suddenly the penthouse was quiet except for the hum of the city far below. "I'm sorry," Madeleine said into the silence. "I shouldn't have disappeared. I thought you'd left." "Aye." Adam's voice was rough, and when she finally looked at him properly, she saw the exhaustion in his face, the tension in his shoulders, the fear he was trying to hide. "I thought you'd read that article and decided this wasn't worth it, that I wasn't worth it." "Adam, and the worst part is, I wouldn't have blamed you." He moved toward her slowly, like he was afraid she might bolt. "This is exactly what I promised wouldn't happen. I said I'd protect you, and instead I threw you to the wolves. You didn't write that article. I might as well have. I'm the reason you're being attacked. I'm the reason your privacy is gone. I'm the reason—" "Stop!" Madeleine closed the distance between them and did something she'd never done before. She reached up and placed her hand against his cheek. He froze at the contact, his eyes going wide. "Adam, I'm still here. I'm not leaving. I just needed a few hours to remember who I am beneath all the noise." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his face. "Who are you, Madeleine? Really? Not the analyst, not the fiancée. Who are you when you're not performing for anyone?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, with possibility, with danger. "I'm someone who's been running so long, I forgot what it felt like to stand still," she said quietly. "I'm someone who painted safe places because nowhere felt safe. I'm someone who made herself invisible because being seen hurt too much." "What hurt you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you running from?" She could lie, should lie. This wasn't part of the contract. But standing there with his hand over hers, with the city glowing around them and walls crumbling between them, she found she didn't want to hide anymore. "My father," she said, and the words tasted like ash. He was charming, successful. Everyone loved him. And behind closed doors, he was a monster. He hit my mother, controlled every aspect of our lives, made us both believe we deserved it. She swallowed hard against the memories. "When I was 17, I finally convinced my mother to leave. We disappeared in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on our backs. And I've been hiding ever since, terrified he'll find us, terrified that if anyone looks too closely at my past, they'll lead him right to us." Adam's expression shattered. "Madeleine, the article said they couldn't find much about my childhood. That's because I erased it. New city, new name. Carter is my mother's maiden name. Knew everything. I built myself into someone so boring, so invisible, that no one would ever think to look deeper." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she couldn't stop them. "And then you offered me $5 million and a chance to stop hiding, and I thought maybe I could be someone else for 2 years. Someone brave. Someone who deserved to be seen." "Madeleine," Adam pulled her into his arms, and she went, collapsing against his chest as 3 years of careful control finally broke. You don't have to hide anymore. Do you understand me? My security team will make sure he never finds you. My lawyers will bury your past so deep that no one will ever connect you to it. You're safe. I promise you, you're safe. She sobbed into his shirt, letting years of fear and exhaustion pour out while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring promises she desperately wanted to believe. When she finally quieted, when her tears had run dry and she felt hollowed out, but somehow lighter, Adam pulled back just enough to look at her face. His thumbs brushed away the remaining tears with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me with that." "It doesn't change anything," Madeline said. "We still have a contract, still have an arrangement." "Madeline." He said her name like a prayer, like a confession, like something that cost him everything. "Can I tell you a secret?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "This stopped being just a contract about 2 weeks ago, maybe longer. I've been lying to myself, pretending I could keep this professional, keep my distance, keep my walls intact." His hands framed her face, and his eyes held something that looked terrifyingly like truth. But the honest reality is that somewhere between Paris and tonight, between watching you be brave and watching you be real, I fell for you. And that wasn't part of the plan at all. Madeline's world tilted on its axis. "You can't mean that." "I can, and I do." He leaned his forehead against hers, and the intimacy of it made her dizzy. "And I know this complicates everything. I know it breaks our rules. But I'm tired of pretending, Madeline. I'm tired of touching you for an audience and wishing I could touch you just for us. Adam, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to feel the same way. We can continue exactly as we planned, and I'll keep this to myself. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that you're not just some contract to me. You're—" He broke off, seeming to search for words. "You're the first person in 8 years who's made me want to tear down these walls, and that terrifies me more than any scandal ever could." Madeline's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. This was wrong. This was dangerous. This was everything they'd agreed wouldn't happen. And yet, she thought about Diana's words at the Met, about the way Adam looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about how safe she felt in his arms, how seen she felt in his presence, how alive she felt when they stopped performing and started just being. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. What if this is just proximity, just circumstance? What if when the 2 years end, we realize it was all an illusion? Then we'll deal with that when it comes." His thumbs traced her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. "But Madeline, I'd rather risk 2 years of something real than spend it hiding behind something safe." She knew she should pull away, should rebuild her walls, should remember that Adam Blackwell was danger wrapped in expensive suits and promises that felt too good to be true. But she was so tired of running, so tired of hiding, so tired of being safe when safe meant being alone. "Kiss me," she said, and watched his eyes go dark with desire and surprise. "Not for an audience, not for a performance. Kiss me because you want to, because I want you to, because maybe Diana was right and the best things surprise us." Adam didn't need to be asked twice. His lips found hers with a hunger that had clearly been building for weeks, and Madeleine melted into him, into the kiss, into the terrifying free fall of letting someone see her completely and choosing to trust them anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adam rested his forehead against hers once more. "So," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I guess we're rewriting the contract?" Madeline laughed, the sound wet and genuine and free. "I guess we are. Outside, the city glowed with a million lights, and somewhere a scandal was raging. But inside, in the quiet of a penthouse that had started to feel like home, two people who'd built their lives around control and protection finally let their walls crumble. And neither of them had ever felt safer. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in December, exactly 6 months after Madeline had signed the contract that was supposed to change nothing, and had ended up changing everything. Snow fell soft and silent over Manhattan as Madeline stood in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by people whose job was to make her beautiful. But she barely saw her reflection in the mirror, the woman in ivory silk and antique lace, with diamonds threaded through her dark hair and a bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. All she could think about was the conversation she'd had with Adam 3 nights ago. They'd been in his study, going over the final details of the ceremony, the guest list, the reception timeline, the carefully choreographed dance they'd perform for James Hartwell, and the 200 witnesses who would watch them exchange vows that were supposed to be temporary. "The Hartwell deal closes on Monday," Adam had said, his voice carefully neutral. 24 hours after we sign the marriage certificate. My lawyers have confirmed that the 2-year clause still stands. We can divorce quietly, exactly as planned, and you'll receive everything promised in the original contract. Madeline had looked up from the seating chart she'd been pretending to study. "Is that what you want?" Adam's jaw had tightened. "What I want and what's fair to you are two different things." That's not an answer. He'd stood then, moving to the window that overlooked the city, his usual refuge when conversations became too real. "Madeline, 6 months ago I offered you a business arrangement, an escape, a chance at a life you couldn't have built on your own. And then He'd broken off, his hands clenched into fists. "Then I complicated everything by falling in love with you. But that doesn't change what I promised. It doesn't give me the right to ask you to stay, when staying was never part of the deal." Her heart had cracked at the resignation in his voice. "What if I want to stay? Do you?" He'd turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression had stolen her breath. "Or do you just think you do, because this life is comfortable, because I've made it easy to forget where you came from? Because walking away from $5 million and a penthouse feels impossible? You think I'd stay for the money?" The words had come out sharper than intended. "I think you've spent your whole life surviving," Adam had said quietly. "And I think you might not know the difference between genuine feeling and gratitude for being rescued. I won't trap you in this marriage, Madeline. I won't let you wake up in 5 years and realize you stayed for the wrong reasons." She'd stood, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "Adam Blackwell, in 6 months, you've learned almost everything about me. You know about my father, about my past, about every fear and scar and secret I've spent years hiding. But apparently you don't know this. I don't do anything I don't want to do. Not anymore, not ever again. Madeline, I'm not finished." She'd placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate under her palm. "You gave me safety. You gave me protection. You gave me a chance to stop running. But you know what else you gave me? You saw me, not the invisible analyst, not the convenient bride. Me. The woman who paints imaginary landscapes and cries during violin concertos and takes her coffee with too much sugar. You saw all of that, and you didn't look away." Adam's hand had covered hers. "I couldn't look away if I tried." "Then stop trying to give me an out I don't want." She'd gone up on her toes, bringing her face close to his. "I'm not staying because of money or comfort or gratitude. I'm staying because somewhere between the contract and the performance, between Paris and tonight, I fell in love with a man who thinks vulnerability is weakness, but shows me his heart anyway. So on Saturday, when I walk down that aisle, I'll be making a choice, and I'm choosing you, for real, forever, if you'll have me." He'd kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise, and when they'd finally broken apart, he'd whispered against her lips, "Forever sounds perfect." But now, standing in the bridal suite, with forever less than an hour away, Madeleine felt the weight of that choice pressing against her chest, like a hand squeezing her heart. "You look like you're about to be sick," Margot observed, appearing at her elbow with the frank assessment Madeleine had come to appreciate over the past 6 months. Cold feet or legitimate concern? "I don't know," Madeleine admitted. "Margot, how do you know when something is real? How do you trust that it won't all fall apart?" Margot's expression softened. "You don't. That's the terrible truth about love, chérie. It requires faith. It requires choosing to believe in something that has no guarantees." She adjusted one of the diamonds in Madeleine's hair with practiced fingers. "But I have watched you and Adam together for 6 months. I have seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I have seen you make him laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time in years. That is not performance, that is not contract, that is real." A knock on the door interrupted whatever Madeleine might have said. One of the assistants opened it to reveal Marcus, Adam's chief of staff, his expression grim. "Miss Carter, may I have a word?" "Privately." Madeleine's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Margot shooed everyone out and Marcus waited until the door closed before speaking. "We have a situation. James Hartwell received an anonymous package this morning. Documents, photos, evidence that your engagement to Adam was initially a contracted arrangement." The room tilted. "How? We don't know yet, but Hartwell is threatening to walk away from the deal unless he gets answers. He's demanding to speak with you, alone, before the ceremony." Where's Adam?" "Downstairs, trying to contain the damage. But Miss Carter—" Marcus's expression was pained. "Hartwell won't negotiate with Adam. He says if this marriage is real, you'll be able to prove it. And if it's not, he wants nothing to do with a man who would build his empire on lies." Madeleine's mind raced. 6 months of work, billions of dollars, Adam's reputation, his company. Everything he'd built could collapse because someone had discovered the truth she and Adam had buried beneath genuine feeling. "Take me to him," she said. Marcus hesitated. "Miss Carter, you don't have to do this. Adam would never ask you to." "I'm not doing this for Adam." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm doing this because Hartwell deserves the truth. Take me to him now." James Hartwell waited in a private sitting room off the main ballroom, a man in his 70s with silver hair, shrewd eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime making decisions that affected thousands of lives. He stood when Madeleine entered, his expression unreadable. Miss Carter, or should I say, Mrs. Blackwell-to-be, assuming, of course, that title means anything at all. Madeleine dismissed Marcus with a nod and waited until the door closed before responding. "Mr. Hartwell, I understand you have questions about my engagement to Adam. I have questions about whether your engagement is anything more than an elaborate fiction designed to manipulate me into signing over my life's work." He gestured to a folder on the table between them. "I have a contract here, dated 6 months ago, outlining a 2-year arrangement between you and Adam Blackwell. A marriage of convenience, a business transaction. Everything I said I would never accept." "That contract exists," Madeleine said quietly, "and everything in it is true. 6 months ago, Adam offered me $5 million to play his wife for 2 years. I accepted." Hartwell's expression hardened. "Then we're done here." "I'm not finished." Madeleine remained standing, her wedding dress pooling around her like ocean foam. "You asked for the truth, Mr. Hartwell. Let me give it to you. 6 months ago, I was a woman who'd spent 3 years making herself invisible. I was running from a past that terrified me, I was alone and scared and convinced that safety meant never being seen. And then Adam offered me a contract that promised protection and security and a chance to stop running. A business arrangement. Yes, at first we had rules, boundaries. We were going to perform for the world and maintain distance in private. It was supposed to be simple. Madeline's hands tightened on her bouquet. But Adam Blackwell has never been simple. He saw through every wall I'd built. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He made me feel safe enough to stop hiding. And somewhere in the middle of pretending to love him, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. A convenient realization, Hartwell said dryly. Do you know what my father did to my mother? Madeline asked, her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering. He isolated her, controlled her, made her believe she was worthless without him. And when we finally escaped, I promised myself I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. I built my entire life around that promise. She took a step closer to Hartwell, letting him see the truth in her eyes. Adam Blackwell has enough power to destroy me with a single phone call. He knows secrets about my past that could ruin everything I've built. And you know what he's done with that power? Nothing. He's protected me. He's defended me. He's given me space to become who I was always meant to be. That's not control, Mr. Hartwell. That's love. Words are easy, Miss Carter. You're right. They are. Madeline set down her bouquet and reached for the folder containing the contract. She opened it, scanned the pages until she found what she was looking for, and then, before she could second-guess herself, tore the contract in half. Then quarters. Then into pieces so small they fluttered to the ground like snow. "And what are you doing?" Hartwell's voice was sharp with surprise, proving that I don't need a contract to marry Adam Blackwell. I don't need $5 million or security or protection. I need him, just him, flawed and complicated and so terrified of being vulnerable that he tried to give me an exit clause 3 days ago. She met Hartwell's eyes steadily. So yes, our engagement started as business, but it ends as love. And if you can't accept that people can surprise themselves, if you can't believe that something real can grow from something practical, then walk away from this deal, because I'm done performing for anyone's approval. Silence filled the room like water. Hartwell studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, something shifted in his face. A softening around the eyes, a curve at the corner of his mouth. "My wife and I," he said quietly, "met because her father and mine arranged it. A business merger disguised as a marriage. We were both 22 years old and convinced we'd be miserable." He smiled, and it transformed his stern features. "We were married for 48 years before she passed. And not a single day went by that I didn't thank God for that arranged marriage that became the love of my life." Madeline's breath caught. "So I understand, Miss Carter, exactly what you're telling me." Hartwell reached down and picked up one of the torn contract pieces. "But I need to know, are you marrying Adam Blackwell because you love him, or because walking away feels too hard?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Madeline thought about the past 6 months, about Paris and paintings and late-night conversations where they'd stopped performing and started just being. About the way Adam touched her like she was precious, about the way he made her laugh, about the way he'd held her while she cried and promised her father would never find her, about the way she felt when she woke up in the morning knowing he was just down the hall, about the way her heart had cracked when he'd offered her an exit clause she didn't want. "I'm marrying him," she said quietly, "because he's the first person who's made me want to stop running. Because he sees all of me and doesn't flinch. Because when I imagine my life in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years, he's the only person I want standing beside me. That's not convenience, Mr. Hartwell. That's not fear of walking away. That's love. Real, messy, terrifying, beautiful love. Hartwell nodded slowly. Then he extended his hand. Then I believe the ceremony is about to start, and there's a groom downstairs who probably thinks his world is ending. Shall we prove him wrong? Adam stood at the altar trying to remember how to breathe. Marcus had told him everything, about the leaked contract, about Hartwell's ultimatum, about Madeline going to meet him alone. That had been 23 minutes ago, and every second since had felt like drowning in slow motion. He should call it off, should protect Madeline from this catastrophe. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Adam's heart stopped entirely. Madeline stood framed in the doorway, a vision in ivory silk and antique lace, with December light streaming through the windows behind her and turning her into something that belonged in paintings. James Hartwell stood beside her, offering his arm with the formal courtesy of another era. And as the string quartet began to play and Madeline started down the aisle, her eyes found Adam's and held them with an intensity that made him forget they had an audience. Forget that 200 people were watching. Forget everything except the woman walking toward him like she meant it. Like she chose this. Like she chose him. When she finally reached the altar, Hartwell placed her hand in Adam's and leaned close to murmur, "Your fiancée makes a compelling argument. Don't make me regret believing her." Then he stepped back, and suddenly it was just Adam and Madeline, standing in front of an officiant who was beginning to speak words Adam couldn't quite hear over the roaring in his ears. "You came," he whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought—" He swallowed hard against emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Hartwell found out about the contract. I thought you'd realize this was too complicated, too messy, too—" "Adam." Madeline squeezed his hands, grounding him. "Stop thinking. Start listening." The officiant was talking about love and commitment and choices that define lives, about how marriage wasn't just a promise, but a daily decision to choose partnership over solitude, vulnerability over safety, faith over fear. And then it was time for vows. Adam had prepared something, words carefully crafted by speechwriters and approved by lawyers, professional, perfect, safe. He ignored all of it. "Madeline," he said, his voice rough with emotion, 6 months ago I offered you a contract because I thought I could control this, control us, control the risk. But you walked into my carefully ordered world and demolished every wall I'd built. You made me laugh, you made me hope, you made me believe that maybe I deserved something real." He could see tears gathering in her eyes, and it gave him courage to continue. "I know this started wrong. I know I should have asked for forever instead of offering 2 years, but I'm asking now. I'm asking for messy mornings and difficult conversations and 50 years of learning how to love you better every day. I'm asking for real, for us, for everything we never planned but both desperately want. If you'll have me." Madeline's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "You forgot to ask the question." "What question?" "Will you marry me?" She laughed, the sound wet and genuine and free. "Because in case it wasn't clear, my answer is yes. Yes to messy mornings, yes to difficult conversations, yes to a lifetime of choosing you even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because Adam Blackwell, you're the best surprise of my entire life, and I'm done pretending otherwise." Adam didn't wait for permission. He pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, completely, in front of God and James Hartwell and 200 witnesses who erupted into applause. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, the officiant cleared his throat pointedly. "I believe there are a few more formalities," he said dryly. They exchanged rings, platinum bands that felt like promises. They signed papers that transformed a contract into a covenant. And when the officiant finally pronounced them married, when Adam kissed his wife for the second time in 5 minutes, when the ballroom erupted in celebration, he knew with absolute certainty that this was real. This was forever. This was everything he'd never known he wanted. 2 years later, Madeline stood in front of an easel set up in the corner of their bedroom, a paintbrush in one hand and coffee in the other, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold and rose. The canvas before her showed a landscape that didn't exist, rolling hills dotted with lavender, a stone cottage with smoke curling from its chimney, mountains in the distance that touched a sky full of impossible colors. A safe place. But she didn't need imaginary safety anymore. She'd found the real thing. Arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and Adam's chin settled on her shoulder. "You're up early." Inspiration struck. She leaned back against him, comfortable in a way that still sometimes surprised her. "What do you think?" "I think you're brilliant." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I also think you should show these at a gallery. The world deserves to see what I get to wake up to every morning." Madeline laughed. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Blackwell." "I'm counting on it, Mrs. Blackwell." She turned in his arms, setting down the paintbrush and coffee to loop her hands behind his neck. 2 years. They'd passed the deadline from the original contract 6 months ago, and neither of them had mentioned it. Because this wasn't about time limits anymore. This was about building a life that neither of them wanted to walk away from. "I talked to my mother yesterday," Madeline said. "She's coming to visit next month. She wants to meet the man who convinced her daughter that not all powerful men are dangerous." Adam's expression softened. "I can't wait to meet her. To thank her for raising someone who's brave enough to tear up contracts and choose chaos. We're not chaotic. We're beautifully chaotic." He kissed her softly, sweetly, with the ease of someone who knew they had a lifetime to perfect it. "We're messy and complicated and absolutely nothing like what I planned. And Madeline, I wouldn't change a single thing." She smiled against his lips. "Not even the part where James Hartwell almost cancelled the wedding. Especially not that part. You destroyed a contract for me. Very dramatic, very romantic. I was thoroughly impressed. I live to impress you. You do it daily." Adam pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Did I tell you that Diana called yesterday? She wants us to join the board for her education foundation. Something about role models for young women who think they don't belong in certain rooms." Madeline's chest tightened with emotion. 2 years ago she'd been invisible, running, hiding. Convinced that safety meant never being seen, now she was visible, present, building a life that felt too good to be real, except it was real, more real than anything she'd ever known. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's show them that belonging isn't about where you start. It's about who you choose to become." Adam kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, full of promise and heat and the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd chosen each other daily for 2 years and would keep choosing each other for all the years to come. Outside, the city woke to another day. Inside, in a penthouse that had become a home, two people who'd started with a contract stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sunrise paint safe places in gold and rose, and neither of them would ever be invisible again.